A simple man wearing a cap, worn-out sneakers, and a backpack walks into a random bank branch. In a few minutes, he would be accused of fraud, humiliated, and even have the police called against him. What no one there knew was that he was the most powerful man in the place. And what he did next will leave you speechless. Stay until the end of this story, because the twist will surprise you and may even move you. It was around 10:00 in the morning when he walked in. The atmosphere was as usual. Freezing air conditioning, serious employees behind the counters, and a line that snaked all the way to the glass door. No one paid him any attention at first, and if they did, it was only to judge him in silence. He wore a faded T-shirt, worn-out jeans, old sneakers with the toes torn, and a backpack on his back. One of those cheap ones you find at the fair, and a black cap covering part of his face, as if he didn't want to be noticed. But it was all planned. He walked in slowly, head down, and took his number like any other regular customer. He passed two attendants who didn't even greet him. The security guards stared at him for a few seconds, assessing whether he posed any risk. In the line, he looked around. A man was trying to figure out how to access the app, while the employee said impatiently, "My, told you, sir, you can only do that on your cell phone." Further ahead, a woman in a kitchen uniform was holding an envelope with money. He had been there for almost an hour, and no one had called his number. He saw and felt everything, because he had been there before and had been ignored in that same way. But today the situation was different. This was the agency he himself had helped to renovate. The furniture, the service policies, even the operating system of the machines. Everything had been approved by him, because that man in the cap and worn backpack was Elias Santana, the CEO, and no one had any idea. Elias was not there by chance. His presence at that agency was the result of a decision he had made weeks before after receiving a series of messages that deeply bothered him. Handwritten letters, emotional emails, and even comments on social media all reached him with one thing in common: humble clients reporting humiliation, neglect, and hidden prejudice at the agencies. "Girl, I went to ask for help and she didn't even look at me. They said I didn't have the profile for an account. I was treated as if I was begging for money." At first, Elias tried to believe that these were isolated cases, but the reports were repeated and had a pattern. The victims were always simple people who dressed modestly, who spoke with a slum accent, who didn't have fancy vocabulary. He knew what that meant. He knew because he had been exactly that person. He remembered the first time he stepped into a bank as a teenager, trying to open a college account. He remembered the employee who laughed at his last name. He remembered the look of disgust when he told her he worked as a cleaning assistant. He remembered how he left there, with his head down, swearing to himself that one day he would do everything differently. And now, so many years later, he was at the top, but it hurt. Seeing that even with all the modernization and nice talk of inclusion, nothing had really changed in the hearts of certain people. So, he decided that he wouldn't send memos or hold meetings. He would see, feel, test it himself. He wanted to know who was really honoring the uniform and who was just wearing the tie as a symbol of power. And that day, In the middle of that agency, that was exactly what he would do. Elias Santana was born in Jardim, Brasilia, on the outskirts of the east side of São Paulo. The son of a maid and a bricklayer, he learned the value of work from an early age. His childhood was marked by overdue bills, rationed food, and few options. On rainy days, water would flood the house. On sunny days, the asphalt would boil and burn the bare feet of the street children. Studying was always a struggle. The public school in the neighborhood lacked books, teachers, and security. But Elias had something that no one could take away from him: the will to succeed. He studied by candlelight when the power was cut. He sold ice cream on the street to help his mother with the groceries. He worked odd jobs at a small grocery store to pay the monthly tuition for a community college. And when he passed the entrance exam, he cried like someone who had just won a war. It was at that time that he began working as an intern at a small financial cooperative, typing numbers, serving coffee, answering the phone. He observed everything in silence, learned from every mistake, and wrote down every detail. While many mocked his origins and heavy accent, Elias grew on the inside. Years later, already a graduate in business administration, with a postgraduate degree under his belt and a pile of books read during the early hours of the morning, he received his first big offer to take over as strategic area of a growing bank. From then on, he climbed the ladder step by step, but he never forgot where he came from. He never traded humility for arrogance and never ignored the fact that for many, he was still just a guy from the outskirts. Maybe that's why the mission was so important, because Elias wasn't there just as if. He was there as a representative of millions of Brazilians who are judged by their appearance before they even open their mouths. And something was about to happen at that agency that would change everything. Elias had been in that line for almost 30 minutes. Time didn't bother him. He wanted to observe, feel, see with his own eyes what so many customers had reported, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the reports were true. Next to him, a lady with bags on her lap was trying to ask for a number for in-person service. The employee, sitting behind the glass, answered without even looking up. "It's right there on the totem, Mom. Just press the button." The woman, visibly confused, replied, "But I don't know how to use that, honey. Help me, please." Quote. The attendant just nodded impatiently. Elias intervened, helped the woman get the number, offered her the seat next to him, and said with a smile, "Calm down, Mrs. Nair. They'll call you in a moment." She returned the favor with gratitude in her eyes, and then whispered, "You're different. The others here treat us like we're trash." That sentence hit him hard. Soon after, an employee walked past him. She was in a hurry and frowned when she smelled the sweat coming from Elias' backpack. "Security, keep an eye on this one," she whispered. He listened, pretended not to, but every detail registered in his mind. The last straw came when his password was finally called. The teller was manned by a young woman named Priscilla, who greeted him with a suspicious look. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'd like to make a withdrawal." "How much?" "Our doll 72,000. She stopped, looked up and laughed, thinking he was joking. "Sir, documents, please." Elias handed over his ID and card. She typed in the information, made a startled expression, and murmured, "Isn't this account yours?" "Of course it is. You can confirm it by the CPF." The young woman looked him up and down. "Sir, I'm sorry, but someone like you doesn't have that kind of balance in that account. We'll have to investigate. I'm sorry, but it looks like a scam." Elias remained calm, didn't answer immediately, just said, "Then call the manager, please." She hesitated, but called the room in the back, and when she hung up, she said something that cut through the air. "People like that always try this kind of thing." The mood inside the agency began to change. Other customers in line, who had previously been just impatient, now looked curiously in the direction of the teller where Elias was. Priscilla, the attendant, spoke softly on the phone, but her expression made it clear that she was uncomfortable. It wasn't just protocol, it was judgment. She hung up and looked directly at Elias. "The manager is coming right up. But, sir, if you're using false documents, then that's a crime, okay? We're going to have to call bank security." Elias kept his composure. He was used to being judged, but inside, he was seething with indignation. While he waited, out of the corner of his eye, he saw one of the security guards whispering to the other, discreetly pointing in his direction. Two customers commented to each other, "You'll see. It really is a scam. With that outfit wanting to withdraw 70,000, you think we're stupid." A few minutes later, a man in a fitted suit, an imported watch, and meticulously combed hair came out of a back room. It was Rodrigo Ferraz, the manager. His shoes were shining, and the smell of expensive perfume preceded him. He walked up to the cashier with quick steps and an expression of practiced authority. "Good afternoon. What's going on here?" he explained quickly with a look of veiled approval. Rodrigo didn't even look at Elias right away. He turned to the security guard and nodded. "Documents, please," the manager said, finally looking at Elias as if he were about to interrogate a suspect. "They've already been presented," Elias replied calmly. "And you want to withdraw that amount wearing that?" Rodrigo laughed sarcastically. "I'm sorry, but there's clearly something wrong here. That kind of movement doesn't suit your profile." A few discreet chuckles echoed around. The line stopped. Everyone was now staring. "Let's cut this short," he said. "Rodrigo, you have two options. Either tell me who told you to do this, or we'll call the police, because this account isn't yours. And honestly, I'm tired of seeing this kind of cheap scam." The sentence fell like a sentence. Elias looked around, saw looks of contempt, distrust, people who, like him, should be on the same side, and yet they judged him only by his clothes, his skin, his origins that they didn't even know. "You can call the police then," said Elias, looking straight into Rodrigo's eyes. The manager signaled, and as he picked up his cell phone to make the call, he mumbled without any shame. That was all he needed. A beggar trying to act like a millionaire. Rodrigo Ferraz hung up the phone after talking to the police. "They're on their way. You're going to wait right here." Without giving Elias any option to explain himself, he was already treating him like a criminal. Priscilla was standing next to him, chatting with another employee. "I've seen this kind of thing. They come in pretending to be customers. They use real documents, but the accounts belong to third-party trained scammers. Elias remained standing with his backpack still on his back. He didn't say anything, didn't get upset, just watched. The manager then decided to follow the procedure. Open the account for this CPF. Let's check the data. Priscilla hesitated, but then she did. Checked. Everything matches. The name, the CPF, the card, everything is correct. It doesn't matter. People like him don't have that kind of balance. Don't fall for it, Priscilla. That sentence came out naturally, like someone talking about the weather. People like him. Elias took a deep breath. That wasn't the first time he had heard that in his life, but it was the first time he had heard it inside the institution that he himself helped build from the ground up. Rodrigo then turned to the security guard. Keep an eye on him. If he tries to leave, hold him back. And then he looked at Elias. If you have something to confess, it's better to do it now. It will save you time and headache. I have nothing to confess. I just asked to withdraw my own money, Elias replied without changing his tone. Rodrigo smiled disdainfully. Oh, of course, and I'm the president of Brazil. The entire agency was now in a comfortable silence. Some customers watched with pity, others with curiosity. And there were also those who crossed their arms, shook their heads, and thought, serves them right. But no one, absolutely no one there had any idea who that man was. While they waited for the police, Rodrigo went back to his office, huffing. Priscilla remained at her post, looking at Elias with the same superior expression. Elias then sat down, calmly took off his backpack, took out his cell phone, and sent a single message. It's time. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars stopped in front of the agency. 2 uniformed police officers entered through the revolving door with the naturalness of someone who was already familiar with that environment. Rodrigo Ferraz left his office at the same time with hurried steps and a satisfied look on his face. It was as if he was about to solve the case of the day. That's him over there, gentlemen, he said, pointing to Elias, who was sitting with his hands clasped in his lap. The people waiting to be served pretended not to look, but everyone was paying attention. He presented genuine documents, but we have reason to believe that the bill is not his. High amount, suspicious behavior, and inappropriate clothing. The most experienced police officer frowned. Do the documents match? Priscilla responded with a little less conviction. Yes, they are correct, but his history does not match the amount in the bill. Elias looked at the 2 police officers and calmly said, Can I show you other documents? I have a work ID too. What is your position, sir? I prefer to show that when necessary. Quote. Rodrigo interrupted impatiently. See, you're not answering. You're playing the victim. That's a scammer's pattern. They know how to cheat. He turned to the police officers. Take it to the police station. We'll file a complaint there. Then the legal center will sort it out. The younger police officer hesitated, looked at Elias, and noticed that he didn't seem nervous. He wasn't shaking, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't running away. He was calm. Would you like to come with us? Sure, Elias replied. But first, I'd like to speak with Mr. Rodrigo Oz. Just a minute. Rodrigo crossed his arms. You're going to try to threaten me with me. Because if you're my friend, you're going to get in trouble. You're surrounded here. Elias then stood up, put his cell phone in the palm of his hand. opened a file with a digital badge, photo, and a digital stamp. He stretched out his arm. The police officer looked at Rodrigo too. And there was Elias Santana, the National Executive Director. Silence. Rodrigo's eyes widened. The color of his face changed. The words disappeared. The older police officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Sir, is this true?" Elias then took a folder out of his backpack. It contained a copy of the company's bylaws, the tenure contract, and the signature of the chairman of the board. "I'm on a personal visit. We came to evaluate the service provided by some of the branches. The footage of everything that happened today is already being sent to the company's legal department." The silence turned into embarrassment. Customers began to whisper. Priscilla slowly moved away from the cash register. Rodrigo stood still, not knowing whether to apologize or run. And who was Elias doing so calmly? He had already faced much worse things in his life. He simply said, "I asked to withdraw what was mine, and you treated me like trash." The air in the agency seemed heavier. Rodrigo, the manager, who moments before had exuded arrogance, was now motionless, looking at the digital badge with the name Elias Santana printed on it, trying to understand how that was possible. "And is that really it?" "You are Elias," he said with a nod. "Wes, I am the National Executive Director, and until now, I have been treated like a criminal for trying to withdraw my own money." The older police officer cleared his throat again, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Elias, I think there is no longer any need for our presence." Quote, "No," Elias said. "I appreciate your presence. It was not you who made the mistake." Rodrigo, in turn, took steps back, trying to find words. "If, Mr. Elias, I had no way of knowing. You were dressed like that. You understand, right?" And it was exactly then that Elias looked him deep in the eyes and said, "I understand, yes. I understand that you judge a client by their clothes, by the color of their clothes, skin accent, or the balance you think he should have, and that says a lot more about the Lord than it does about me." The agency was completely silent. Priscilla was now in the back, staring at the floor. The security guard, who had been following Elias with his eyes, lowered his head. Even the customers who had previously been muttering, "It must be a scam," were visibly disconcerted. Elias continued, "For years, I have been receiving complaints about the type of service offered here. Simple customers being ignored, humiliated, treated as if they were invisible. And today I experienced this intentionally to see it with my own eyes. And I saw Rodrigo trying to react. Mr. Elias, I was just following protocol. I'm really sorry. If protocol includes discrimination, then your position is at odds with everything this institution preaches. And you have been warned about this other times." Elias pulled out his cell phone and opened a video call. On the other end, an HR director appeared. "You can start the procedure. Rodrigo Ferraz will be dismissed from the company for serious misconduct and breach of ethical conduct. Provide an immediate replacement. Priscilla should also be preventively removed until further evaluation." Rodrigo's face fell. "Please, Mr. Elias, I have been a manager for 8 years. I made mistakes, but I have a family, children." Elias took a deep breath. "And how many fathers have you humiliated here without thinking twice? How many women, elderly people, workers, have you treated as if they were nothing?" Rodrigo didn't answer. He just lowered his head. Elias then turned to the customers, who were still watching everything in silence. Today, I came as one of them, and it was the best thing I could have done. Rodrigo was in shock. The man he tried to expel as a criminal was actually his highest superior and was now being fired in front of the entire agency. Rodrigo Ferraz, as of this moment, you are dismissed from the company, the HR director repeated over the video call. You must leave the unit and will no longer have access to any internal systems or documents. Rodrigo tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. The employee, Priscilla, who was watching everything from the side of the counter, turned pale. Elias then turned to her. You know why you're being dismissed, don't you? She nodded with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, sir. I was carried away by the moment. It wasn't the moment that guided you. It was yours. He then looked at the rest of the employees. If anyone here believes that your uniform is synonymous with superiority or that customers need to dress well to be treated with respect, I ask that you reconsider your own values or ask to leave. The atmosphere was heavy, but now it was a real weight, a weight of conscience that hung over everyone. Rodrigo took off his badge, handed it to the security guard, and, with his eyes on the ground, walked across the agency in silence, under the gazes that now lacked approval, but were ashamed. Elias walked up to the lady he had helped at the beginning, Mrs. Nair. She looked at him in surprise. Was that you all along? Wes, but today I didn't come as a director. I came as someone who understands what you're going through. She held his hand and said with an emotional smile, if all powerful people were like that, the world would be saved. Elias smiled back. If everyone does their part, things will be much better. He turned back to the strangers. This agency will be remodeled. And now, based on respect, whoever wants to be a part of it will be welcome. Whoever doesn't, the door is the same one the manager left through. As he left the agency, Elias stopped for a moment. The sun was beating down on the sidewalk, and he looked up at the sky as if he were giving thanks. Not for his position, not for the authority he wielded, but for the chance to continue remembering where he came from and who is still at the bottom, even at the top. He entered that bank as an ordinary man and left as a living example that respect is not measured by appearance or bank balance. On the sidewalk, one of the customers approached him. Mr. Elias, thank you. What you did today, no one has ever done for us. He shook the man's hand firmly. My position is just a detail. What moves me is the memory of my mother, who spent her whole life being treated as if they had no value. That agency changed from that day on. The employees were reevaluated. New ones. Leaders were placed in strategic positions, and the new customer service department was guided by a phrase written in large letters on the wall. Treat each person as if they were your best customer, because they are. Elias returned to his office routine, but made it clear. From time to time, he would put on his old shirt, shoes, worn-out sneakers, put on his cap, and walk among the invisible, because it is among the invisible that the truth lies. And now tell me, have you ever been in a situation where you were judged by your appearance? Share in the comments. Your story can touch a lot of people, And if you want to continue seeing stories like this that move us and make us reflect, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The next stories will still surprise you.